recording, and yeah, we're starting the recording now. And once again, welcome everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm always happy to reach out to the community. Thank you for the invitation.
We appreciate your presence. And I think, as I said earlier before you joined, the way we're going to proceed, if you allow us just to start with, we'll introduce you with a brief bio that we have. And after that, it will be your presentation and the period of questions after your presentation. Would that be okay, Mr. Skeete?
That sounds good.
Okay, so we'll start with the bio. And let me introduce Mr. Christopher Skeete. He's an MNA for the riding of Sainte-Rose in Laval. After his election in 2018, Mr. Skeete was nominated as Parliamentary Assistant to the Premier for relations with English-speaking Quebecers. And he has served on various parliamentary committees, including culture and education, sexual exploitation of minors, and been assigned also to anti-racism task force to address the problem of racism in Quebec. And that was formed following George Floyd's death. And it aims at ending discrimination towards visible minorities and including Native communities. And in addition to his political career, Mr. Skeete is also CEO of a medical firm and has been a Vice President, Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Laval. He's a former mentor at University of Concordia, and he has his MBA from Concordia University.
Bonjour Monsieur Skeete, donc je vous présente Christopher Skeete, est député de Sainte-Rose pour la coalition Avenir Québec. À la suite des élections de 2018, Christopher Skeete est nommé comme adjoint parlementaire du Premier ministre pour les relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise. À ce titre, il se voit confier le mandat de bâtir les ponts avec les communautés anglophones à travers le Québec. Il a siégé sur diverses commissions, dont celle des relations avec les citoyens, de la culture et de l'éducation, et la commission spéciale sur l'exploitation sexuelle des mineurs. Il a également été choisi par le Premier ministre afin de siéger sur un comité visant à lutter contre le racisme et à enrayer les discriminations faites à l'égard des minorités visibles et ethniques, incluant les communautés autochtones. Outre son amour pour la politique, il travaille depuis plusieurs années en gestion de la santé. Il est notamment le PDG d'une entreprise spécialisée qui offre des tests de diagnostic et des vaccins. C'est un passionné d'entrepreneuriat, mentor, entrepreneur à l'Université Concordia. Il a complété sa maîtrise en administration des affaires à l'Université du Québec à Montréal.
Mr. Skeete, that's our introduction. So I think without any further ado, we're going to give you the floor. And we thank you again for being with us. Merci,
thank you.
Skeete, pour être là. On vous laisse la parole.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure, as I said, to reach out to the community and to be present here. My introduction is going to be very short. What I've gathered from my 3 short years working with the community is that oftentimes we don't feel very connected to the government of Quebec. We don't feel very close to the government of Quebec. And so I think what's more important than me speeching about is to address maybe some of the concerns and comments and questions that you guys might have. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability in the hopes that we can gain, if not consensus and agreement, at least understanding for one another. And my hope is that we can do that together tonight. As I said, it's a file that for me is very important because I've always had sort of one foot in each reality. Growing up in a French household with a separatist father-in-law, I went to English school during the 1995 referendum. So I've always sort of had that duality in my life. It wasn't, I'd be called the pepper at school and I'd be called the bloke at home. I'm half white, I'm half black. So I've always sort of had this in-between vibe my whole life. So I'm not unaccustomed to being sensitive to both realities. And I think if perhaps my greatest strength in the file that I have is the fact that I have that ability to relate to both sides. I know that the English community does not always see the efforts that I make inside the government, but there's a lot of effort on the other side in bridge building between the English community and the Francophones, and between the Francophones and the English community. And it's a task that, let's face it, for 50 years has not been done. For 50 years, those of us who love Canada were forced to choose between our country and our home. That sort of kept us out of basically, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that basically forced us to only contemplate one issue at every election. And I think there's a price to pay for that when you only have one job to do and one mandate to do for an election is to save the country. I think that we pay a price for that. And I think 50 years of are we leaving Canada? Are we staying in Canada? Has sort of pushed aside a lot of the bridge building that should have went on. So the way that I see my role inside this government is to give back this Quebec flag, this beautiful flag, back to English-speaking Quebecers, because it's your flag. And in a lot of ways, the separatist movement usurped that flag for its purposes. And we have a right to be proud Quebecers. We have a right to be proud Canadians. And I think we don't have to choose between the two. So that's what guides me on a day-to-day basis. And I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you and all of you. And let's take the time to get to know each other.
Mr. Skeete, I know we had, maybe we can start a couple of questions that we sent earlier to your...
Yeah, let me take a look at them here.
If I may, or you can read them, or if you would like to start with those.
Sure. So I have here, quels étaient les indices qui ont sonné l'alarme signalant que la langue française est menacée au Québec et qu'il fallait la protéger par une nouvelle loi? Et il s'était manifesté plus particulièrement à Montréal ou à Québec. Donc, is that the question? Basically, what were the indicators? Yeah, what were the indicators that prompted a discussion? Well, if we go back in time, when I do these kind of town hall meetings, I go out of my way not to make politics. I don't think this forum is for political discourse. I think so. I try to be very reasoned, and I try not to throw anybody under the bus, even though I have strong opinions. I also think that we need to be fact-based, and then I'll let you guys make up your own mind. What we before, when I was talking about the 50 years of, are we leaving Quebec? Are we staying? Are we leaving Canada? Are we staying in Quebec? All that has consequences, because when, for instance, one party is in power, they have an incentive to talk about language and culture and the lack thereof, right? So if we think of historically the Parti Québécois, they would have an incentive to sort of show that it doesn't work in Canada. And conversely, if a Liberal Party was in power, then they would have an advantage, or an incentive to make sure that we didn't talk about all the things that don't necessarily work in Canada, right? So now you can agree or disagree with that, but that's basically what we've noticed, is that with the 15 years of the Liberal government that was in power before our turn came, what we noticed was that there were a lot of reports that were in the Office Québécois de la langue française that were not published. Why they weren't published, I won't speculate. But there has been numerous reports that were not published that had indicators of showing some areas of concern with regards to the French language in Quebec. So One of the things that we're proposing, for instance, in Bill 96 is to remove politics from language. I think, we can all breathe a sigh of relief when we say that we want to depoliticize language. And I think by naming an independent commissioner, we're going to be doing just that. No more will people who have a political interest in one narrative versus the other have control over the reports on the state of French, on the state of language in Quebec. We're going to be naming a commissioner that's going to be nominated by 60% of the elected officials in Parliament, and that person will have sole exclusive jurisdiction to make sure that they report on the state of French. So one of the first things we're doing with Bill 96 is removing politics from the question. But what we noticed from the reports that were, let's say, shelved at the OQLF is that there had been some reports that showed some indicators that showed that French was in decline. But there's also, and I think people underestimate this, there's also the perception of people who believe that there's slippage in French. For instance, there were numerous news articles in various French media that had anecdotal evidence of persons not able to receive services in certain parts of Quebec, especially, let's say it, in Montreal. So even that feeds sort of a momentum that gives governments a mandate. What we saw in the reports was two things. First of all, the number of French speakers in Quebec is relatively stable. But what we're noticing is the language transfer. And when I say language transfer, which for me is the most, the largest red flag, it's that, for instance, when we have an immigrant coming from Cambodia and they go to Toronto, the language transfer from Cambodian to the local common language, English in the case of Toronto, is about 98, 99%. So that means the person who's immigrating from another country to Ontario, there's a 99% chance, and the language transfer is pretty successful between whatever native language they have and the English language. When we go to New Brunswick, the only bilingual province in Canada, the language transfer is actually 70% towards English anyway, even from Francophones. So you could be a Francophone from France immigrating to New Brunswick, an officially bilingual province. And even there, the language transfer, the person's probably a 70% chance that they're going to transfer to English and a 30% chance that they'll transfer to French. In Quebec, it's less bad, but it's still worrisome. The language transfer is 55% towards French, which means 45% of immigrants that move to Quebec, that choose to stay in Quebec, they'll choose ultimately English as the language that they'll settle in. Now, one of the things that I've learned in my tenure at the Secretariat is the single greatest indicator that deprives English-speaking Quebecers of their right to be successful in Quebec is their inability to communicate effectively in French. And when I say communicate, I don't mean go to the depth and ask where the Coca-Cola is. I mean being functionally able to write, to express themselves, to have a complex conversation. That ultimately is the largest indicator why we're seeing in the English community, for instance, low levels of ascension to the civil service, low levels of ascension to various jobs that are not federal jurisdictions, right? When we think federal jurisdictions, we think of banks, telecoms, aeronautics. These are federally chartered things, and things tend to be more bilingual there. So English-speaking Quebecers tend to do better there. I'm talking about provincial jurisdictions. We don't see a lot of English-speaking Quebecers doing well there, to the point where the unemployment rate for English-speaking Quebecers in regions like the Gaspé is a third, 33%. Of English-speaking Quebecers in the Gaspé are unemployed. And I think the single largest indicator for that anomaly is the fact that we haven't mastered the common language of Quebec, which is French, which is one of the reasons, again, why in Bill 96, we're proposing to make learning French, being able to live in French in Quebec, a right, which will mean for English-speaking Quebecers the ability to learn and take classes for free in French for life. Because you have a right to be successful in Quebec, and to be successful, it's you must understand and master French. So what we're doing is we're trying to move the needle on the fact that both English-speaking Quebecers, natural born, and soi-disant de souche Québécoise are having less babies. We're increasingly reliant on immigration, and we need to do better in terms of the language transfer of our immigrants. It is the reason why, in many substantive ways, Bill 96 doesn't impact English-speaking Quebecers. It's the reason why, for instance, we're not talking about the healthcare that English-speaking Quebecers get in the healthcare system. We're not talking about anything educationally. English-speaking Quebecers still have control of their institutions. We're not talking about removing anything from English-speaking Quebecers in terms of justice. Now, that's a big deal because we deliberately drafted the bill in such a way as to make sure that if English-speaking Quebecers were not advantaged, they were at least bypassed, because we recognize that English-speaking Quebecers are an important contributor, an important historical contributor to Quebec's success. And you have a right to be happy here. You have a right to vital and vibrant communities. And that's what we're trying to do in Bill 96 by saying that English-speaking Quebecers are largely bypassed. Let me give you an example of a bypass where we say that, for instance, English-speaking Quebecers who receive documents in English will continue to receive their documents in English. And that doesn't change with this bill. However, if you're a new immigrant, we believe that the best way for you to do better in Quebec, to do well in Quebec, is to integrate into the French majority and learn French if you want to be successful. It's the same indicator for English-speaking populations. So we say that if you're an immigrant, you should be going towards the common language of French. But of course, English-speaking Quebecers don't have to comply to that. English-speaking Quebecers have the right to express themselves in Quebec in English with their government. And the place where there's an advantage for English-speaking Quebecers is with CEGEPs. What we're proposing, and one of the things that broke my heart, was I was getting a lot of calls from English-speaking parents who were telling me that their children were not able to get into Dawson or Vanier or John Abbott because they were competing unfairly with high-performing francophones. I know that for myself, when I got into Vanier in 1997, I had an average of, I think, 74, 75%. That today guarantees that you're not getting into those institutions. You need at least an 80, 85%, and that's to get into social sciences. And that is because there is an undue pressure on the English sector network from francophones who should otherwise be going to French schools. What we're proposing in Bill 96 is to give English-speaking Quebecers the first kick at the can, to say, if you're an English-speaking Quebecer, it's your network first. You should be having the first kick at the can for the spots available in your CEGEP system. But we also recognize, unlike, for instance, the Parti Québécois that wants to abolish French-speaking students from accessing the English CEGEPs, we recognize that if we did that, we would fragilize the English CEGEP system. So what we're saying is we're going to put a cap on the number of students that we have right now. We're going to say that cap can grow along with the English-speaking population, but it won't go beyond the pro rata, the amount of the demographic changes of the English community. And we think that's the best way forward to not only guarantee the rights of English-speaking Quebecers in their network that represent about 40% of the students of those institutions, but we also believe that it's a fair way to make sure that francophones can still access the CEGEP system and that these institutions can continue to do as well as they've been doing. And on that, I had consultations with the Fédération des Cégeps Anglophones, which is basically the organization that represents English-speaking CEGEPs. And then the first thing that they told me when I met with them was, listen, Christopher, we don't want to grow more. We're quite content. And of course, the data supports that. Only 40% of the students that go to English-speaking CEGEPs are from the English high school network. So, there's plenty of space for English-speaking Quebecers. There's plenty of room for francophones who want to go there. But at the same time, that network must be allowed to serve in priority its community. And that's one of the ways that we've created an advantage for English-speaking Quebecers. So those are the reasons why. There were reports from the UQLF that suggested that there was slippage in terms of the data of the language transfer. We've also noticed that a lot of the allophone community especially when they are choosing to go to CEGEPs in English. They're doing so as a way to bypass the French exit exam. So what we've done is for those French students, we're implementing the French exit exam even in English CEGEPs, only for them, not for the English population, to make sure that the quality of French of our allophone population remains at a level where we can make sure that these people can be successful in Quebec. I hope I didn't take up too much time, and I'll go ahead and read the next question. If anybody would like me to repeat in French, please let me know also.
Mr. Skeete, I suggest maybe the second question, we can leave it towards the end.
Sure, let's do that.
And leave the floor now for our participants. If they have questions, bonsoir encore tout le monde. Si vous avez des questions, je pense qu'on ouvre la période des questions, si vous voulez. OK.
I think Magda had a
Je
question.
donne la parole à Magda. Donc, Magda, si vous voulez unmute, you can unmute yourself. Okay. I'm trying to see where is Magda.
Magda says she's having difficulty unmuting, which is the
unmute.
story of our lives with this pandemic.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to see. Oh, okay. Ask to unmute.
Maybe we can take someone else's question while Magda figures.
Okay. Okay. Magda, if you can't unmute yourself, please write your question.
Yes, I have your question.
In the meantime, entre-temps, s'il y a d'autres questions.
Sure, I'll jump in if you can hear me all right there, Christopher.
Yes, please, Nick.
Great.
You can hear.
Thank you for all of the background info. As you went through your sort of motivations for the law, one of the pieces that seems to be a gap is, or perhaps you could fill in that gap, is what do you think is motivating French language speakers to attend English CEGEP? Is it a gap in their high school education in English? Is it an additional opportunity to learn English and, or do science in English, for example, that might give them, or STEM sciences, or begin a STEM science path? Because that's certainly one of the areas that's very contentious. It's certainly at John Abbott, where my wife teaches in physics. Getting into physics, getting into science at John Abbott these days, as you say, requires not just an 85, but even higher. And that makes it, ultra competitive, but clearly there is a demand. So what is the CAC proposing in order to meet that demand? Have they thought through teaching sciences in English at the French CEGEPs, for example? I've asked a lot of questions, so I'll let you. Oh, you're still muted.
Actually, I think you're dead on. I think one of the things that we're noticing, and this is why it's a big concern for us, the fact that allophones are transferring to English CEGEPs and English universities, because those are like some of the people who've testified in Bill 96. I'm not sure how much I agree with them, but one of the concerns that they're bringing up that I think is in line with what you're saying is that if we lose ground on doing research in French, or we stop publishing articles in French, and we stop innovating in French, then of course that signals a decline of French intelligentsia, the ability of French science to move forward. So some people have actually said we should extend Bill 96 all the way up to universities. Bill 101 all the way to universities. That's not something that I really believe in. What I want to speak to you about, though, and I think your first question is dead on, is why the heck do Francophones feel the need to go to English-speaking CEGEPs in the first place? Well, I believe there are two reasons. And my truth isn't gospel, but this is my feeling, okay? The first one is, I think the Francophone elementary and the Francophone high school system does a poor job of teaching English to our Francophone students. I think they do a horrible job in teaching the Francophones proper English, considering we're in a North American context. I think if you want to live in North America and be successful in North America, you must, of course, be bilingual. You must understand and speak English. Some people might say that that's a contradiction, right? That here I am proposing a common language of French, but I'm saying that bilingualism is good. It's not a contradiction. When I say that bilingualism is good, I'm saying that bilingualism on an individual level, for a professional, for individual, for a person who wants to be successful in the economy, of course, it's an asset. When I'm talking about being Francophone as the common language of Quebec, I'm saying that is the language that we revert to in our community together when we don't know each other. If we have a person who's from Argentinian descent and a person from German descent, and they're walking in the street, they agree to speak French. That's what common language means, right? If you want to get an idea of what I mean also by common language, I mean, when you go to, I spend some time in South Florida with my kids sometimes, and I mean, if you don't speak Spanish in South Florida, you know, you're missing half the conversation of what's going on, right? But at the same time, the official language is not Spanish and English, it's still English, right? So if you bump into somebody, you're still saying excuse me in English, because the common language, even there, is still English. So there's a difference between common language and, of course, bilingualism as an asset for an individual. So to answer your question, Nick, I think people go to the English sector because they recognize that it's an asset for them to be fluent in multiple languages. And I think it's a reflection of the poor way that we teach Francophones to speak English in their network. I would add, we also do an equally poor job in the English sector of teaching French, by the way. It's the reason why I did my master's degree at l'UQAM, because even though I am Francophone by birth, my mother tongue is French, I still struggle because of my English school education. I still struggle with French writing. It's a struggle for me. I could imagine someone who only gets an hour a day or an hour a week of training, and then, of course, doesn't practice it for years on end. It must be a disaster for them to get a job in this economy. So both sides need to do better at the elementary and high school level, but that has nothing to do with who should be accessing the network. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Skeete. And now I have the question from Magda, who wrote her question, and she wants to know of Anglophone kids who have English eligibility, but have gone to French elementary and are in French secondary, will be considered Anglo or Franco when applying to CEGEP?
That's a very good question, a technical question, but a good one, and one that I've looked up to make sure that I had the answer. The English language certificate is a privilege bestowed upon the English community. We often feel that Bill 101 is like against the English community. In fact, it's really strict for Francophones. We get a pass on a lot of the aspects of Bill 101. So as a member of the English community with an English language certificate, your kids can go to French school and still retain their right, and so will their kids. So it's a right that you never lose.
Thank you. And I have Mr. Clifford Lincoln. You're on mute. Are you able to unmute?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, voilà. Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Skeete, thank you for being here. We appreciate it very much. Like you, I straddle both language communities as well. My mother was French as she could be. My father was born in Scotland. So I was lucky like you to straddle both languages and be comfortable writing or speaking French at the same time, doing so in English. So for me, French is a part of my culture by ancestry. So whatever promotes the French language, I'm with it 100%. But I think you, if I may say so very politely, you've glossed over a lot of the problems of Bill 96, which, you know, for me, as far as these issues go, I was a liberal right throughout my political career, but I'm the first one to criticize the federal government for its stand on Bill 96, and my federal counterparts as well. I find that there are so many fundamental problems in 96 which go far beyond your description. For instance, if the bill is so fair and open to all, why do you have to use as a preventive tool the derogation clause, the notwithstanding clause, that puts away in a corner both charters, the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms of Quebec, #1, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of Canada? If the bill is so nice and clear and happy for everyone, surely it should stand the test of me as a citizen challenging the bill in some facet or another before the courts. Now, we make sure in this bill to use the notwithstanding clause as a preventive tool. Now, I can tell you, I'm a lawyer as well, and I've been reading all the background documentation and historical records that brought up the notwithstanding clause. It was supposed to be used in an extreme emergency. For example, and this was given by the people that promoted it themselves, Mr. Romano and the others from the West that wanted the notwithstanding clause. They gave us an excuse that if there's a judgment that is given in a court that is impossible to put into practice immediately because it's so constraining to the society, the notwithstanding clause gives you a little bit of leeway to suspend the judgment. So they gave this as an example. Mr. Chrétien, who was the Minister of Justice at the time, and Prime Minister Trudeau said, there's no chance it'll be used because it's only an extreme case. And they give us an example, the Bill of Rights passed by Mr. Diffenbaker that has a notwithstanding clause, and it was never used. So they said, surely it'll be the same for this clause, so we can put it in. And now the government of Quebec is using it on Bill 96 and Bill 21 as well to shield all these clauses, which obviously are a problem, some of them, because otherwise they wouldn't be using the notwithstanding clause. Let me give you one example. Under clause, I think it's 174, you can walk into the Office québécois de la langue française, can walk into an office or a commercial establishment without notice, without judicial authorization, and go in there, do a search, pick up all the documents they want, insist that people give them even their cell phones to check whether the language spoken at work is French or English. I mean, is that part of a modern society, of an open society? I would suggest to you, if I, you know, a lot of people would challenge this in court. They can't now because you've shielded the bill. Another issue, we have a Charter of Rights, of Human Rights and Freedoms of Quebec that is cherished by all people in Quebec, regardless of English or French or origin. And it was passed in 1975 by unanimous consent of all the parties. It was revised several times, and every time unanimously. Now, the Charter under Articles 52 says that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of Quebec supersedes all the other legislation, is a masterpiece legislation to protect people and in the fundamental rights. But now with Bill 96, the charter is no longer the main legislation. It's a charter of the French language that has become paramount in Quebec as a top legislation under which all the other legislation stands. You give me one example of a democratic government anywhere that does this. Nowhere. I would like to find out which one it is, whether it's Holland or China or whichever. China is not a good example, but I mean democratic government. Which one suspends their fundamental rights and makes language the paramount legislation? I don't think there's any. So Bill 96, you know, I know you gave the nice parts of it, and I'm for it, for Frenchization, for pushing the French language in many ways. But there's so many problems with this thing. First of all, declaring French the only official language of Quebec and a change in the Canadian Constitution, if that goes through, does that mean English is no longer an official language in Quebec? And what happens now if Alberta, which would love to get rid of French, would say, okay, well, Quebec has managed to fiddle the Constitution to get French as the only official language of Quebec, so we are going to make English the only official language of Alberta or British Columbia. I mean, that bill is so full of huge problems, which are now shielded from the courts by the Notwithstanding Clause. So all
Mr. Lincoln, maybe I could just start answering some of your questions.
Mr. Lincoln, thank you. I think there is a lot to answer, so we should give a chance to.
There's a lot to untangle there. For sure, I'm going to forget something, but dear colleague, let's take the time to get to the end, okay? The Notwithstanding Clause. Well, first of all, you asked what country puts language on top. Ireland. Ireland has done that to protect its national language because it is a language that is fragile and that has been usurped by a more powerful language, that of English. This is not an aberration. A lot of minority language countries or provinces or jurisdictions have taken steps to protect their language. It's the reason why Israel at its foundation created a state that it was Hebrew and brought back Hebrew from death because they made it the national language in order to protect it. So I think
that was my question. My question was, is there a country where language predominates human rights legislation, charters of human rights and freedoms? That is a question.
So if you'll let me finish, what I would say to that is that the Notwithstanding Clause, it is true, is being applied throughout the document. One of the reasons why is, as you well know, the first iteration of 1977's Bill 101 was subsequently shut down by various court decisions that weakened its power and its stance. We don't want that to happen again. We believe that by doing so, we can shield it from future contestations. But beyond that, as you well know as a lawyer, Mr. Lincoln, the Notwithstanding Clause doesn't create, as I've heard some say, a charter-free zone. The Notwithstanding Clause only applies to Section 1 and Section 7 to 15 of the Charter, which only applies to certain situations, which means that Section 133 that says that Canada is a bilingual country is out of scope. We do not have the power to apply the Notwithstanding Clause to that paragraph, which means English-speaking Quebecers' rights are not going to be affected by the blanket use of the Notwithstanding Clause. And if you referenced Alberta, well, I would posit that there's only one bilingual province in Canada, and there are 9 unilingual provinces in Canada, and Quebec happens to be one of those 9 unilingual provinces, and that Alberta recently, a couple of years ago, won the right to only translate, to not translate systematically its legal decisions unless it was asked to do so. So we already live in a place where, for all intents and purposes, there's an ideal of bilingualism in Canada, but the reality is it's very difficult to apply that notion throughout. What we have is the right of English and French speakers to speak their language in the whole jurisdiction of Canada, which is not being affected by this bill. And as I said before, Section 133 that says that that Canada is a bilingual country, that English-speaking Quebecers are allowed to express themselves in court, in Parliament, in the language of their choice, still applies. So I would disagree that the notwithstanding clause in this case is not reasonable. I would say that it's not a deprivation of rights, but more an affirmation of what makes Quebec distinct. And we have to go back to the founding of the Federation for that. British jurisprudence, British law has always put supremacy of Parliament above that of judicial process. It is something that is new, actually, in the constitutional system of parliamentary, in the constitutional parliamentary system, to have that notion. It's a very Americanized import to have this emphasis absolutely on individual rights. In fact, the United Kingdom doesn't even have a constitution. They operate on jurisprudence because they believe in parliamentary supremacy. So what Quebec is doing is continuing the parliamentary tradition of parliamentary supremacy over judicial. Now, I get that is not, people don't like that across the board. What I'm saying is what we're doing is not abnormal, and it's certainly not all encompassing, and it certainly only applies in certain areas. And the areas that it specifically applies to are in areas where Francophones believe that in order to survive the Canadian experience in a North American context, they need to take measures to protect the collective right. And don't forget, the founding of our federation, right? We're a federation, not a republic, because a federation has decentralized, sovereign jurisdictions where each province has the ability to act in its own jurisdictions all the time. That is what Quebec is doing. And I get that some people don't agree with that. But to say that it is a trampling of rights, I think, is to overstate it. And yeah, the courts will have their say, I'm sure, on Bill 96 on many aspects of it that are not subject to the application of the notwithstanding clause. So that's how I would answer that. But of course, intelligent people can disagree, Mr. Lincoln. You're a fine parliamentarian and a fine lawyer and a fine citizen. I'm not sure I'm right and you're wrong, but I'm not sure that you're right and I'm wrong. So well, that's where we stand.
That's a nice way of putting it. But if you are going to tell me that parliamentary edicts and laws supersede the judicial system, then I'm very, very scared, because the judicial system is there because it's a neutral system, it's an independent system created exactly to control institutions like parliaments that could be dictatorial. So you have got the right, and this is why there are charters of rights and freedoms, to give me a right to go to the court, and you say we applied that because of what happened in Bill 101. Obviously, something in Bill 101, the challenge to Bill 101 went to the Superior Court of Quebec, to the Appeal Court of Quebec, to the Supreme Court of Canada. All the judges on a unanimous basis, I think there were 11 in all, said exactly the same thing. So it was to do with one section of Bill 101, which was declared ultra vires. So this is really what the judicial system is there, to have courts to adjudicate on laws which parliaments make. Otherwise, why have a judicial system at all? The idea is that judges are supposed to be neutral, are supposed to be objective, and to control what parliaments do. You can't do it the other way.
Thank you, Mr. Lincoln. I appreciate your comments. And thank you, Mr. Skeete. I just have to give the chance for other questions at this point. I know Janet has a question. Janet Ryan, please unmute.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Skeete. I just wanted to take issue with your comments about Ireland when you say that Ireland is a country that employs something similar to a notwithstanding clause in order to protect its...
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. What I said was Ireland is one of those countries that took the time to enshrine its official language in the legal document and to elevate it to a higher standard. I didn't say anything about notwithstanding clause.
Well, the situation, I happen to grow up in Ireland, so I know what the situation is with the language there, that the Irish language is virtually a dead language. It is still taught in the schools, but there are few, if any, native speakers left. And I take issue with your comparison between Quebec and Ireland, because it is not the same. Please don't make that comparison. It's not a valid comparison. I also wanted to point out, in your initial comments, you were speaking of English-speaking Quebecers as one group, immigrants as another. They're not distinct groups, that there is an overlap. There's a significant number of English-speaking immigrants. You answered Magda's question, and you said that anybody who has an English certificate would always—
Sorry, did you actually answer my question when I was disconnected? I got kicked out and I couldn't get back in, and I missed the topic that I wanted to ask about, so I'm sorry.
Can I finish, please, before?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Magda, your question was answered and I sent you a message.
Oh,
Please,
I was kicked out and I wasn't allowed back in for about 4 or 5 minutes, so I missed it all. So maybe when Janet's done, I can just ask for.
Well, what Mr. Skeete said was that people with English certificates would always be eligible for English CEGEP, but that's my understanding. But I just wanted to point out that there are a number of Anglophones in the community whose kids do not have the English certificate, and they are considered Francophones when they come out of French high school. And you know, they really are Anglophones. They're English first language, but the educational system doesn't consider them Anglophones, and now it seems like the entire government is not going to consider them Anglophones. I think that's an important group that's being forgotten here. That was my comment. Thank you.
Mr. Skeete, you have a comment back to that, or I must ask for further question?
Bill 101 was litigated in 1977. That's when the laws were determined. That's before I was born. So I take no responsibility on that particular decision. That decision in 1977, aspects of Bill 101 are clear. Immigrants go to the Francophone sector, and the English community can choose where it wants to go.
Okay, I know that there are two questions to be asked, but I'm not sure who was asking the question. Okay, Maria Ducino, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Suzanne. Mr. Skeete, I have several different points I want to bring up, so I will probably do one at a time and leave others. And that wasn't one of them with my iPad falling here. So there's a couple of points I want to bring up, but I'm going to do one at a time because I know there's others that want to speak. I want to address the fact that Quebec is a unilingual province that you've indicated. Quebec is only unilingual province if you take out the island of Montreal or the Montreal region. Because if you look at the demographics, the immigrants and come to the island of Montreal to work. People coming to Quebec from other provinces is effectively for work or to establish or an education. And the place where they're going to go is to the island of Montreal. And then if they enjoy it here quite a bit, they end up working here and establishing themselves either on the island of Montreal or the greater Montreal region. I happen to look at demographics, and you know that as a statistician myself, we can have statistics say whatever we want them to say. But if we looked at the demographics of Quebec, and unfortunately, the only ones I was able to find today, if I go in a minute here, and of course, when I'm looking for it, they seem to disappear. What it indicated is, and I will come back to that in a minute, was that in the island of Montreal, the mother tongue being French on the island of Montreal in 2011 was 46% roughly, and in other places like the Saguenay, Quebec, etc., were over 90%, some as high as 98%. So you're right. In the region outside of the island of Montreal, you could say Quebec is unilingual, but people from outside don't come to those places. They come to the island of Montreal. So I think when we're looking at language laws and looking at where the population lives, there has to be an acknowledgement that while Quebec, in the most part, depending on where you live, is unilingual, the island of Montreal is bilingual, and the cities that are on the island, including the town of Baie-d'Urfé, is a bilingual city because more than 50% of the population here, they're not mother tongue, but they're English speaking at home, and that designation is important to keep. So it is important that that stays there. It is important that it's not challenged and that it is removed. I'm glad to see that municipalities were allowed to vote to keep their bilingual status through a resolution of council. The concern was that the definition of what determined the bilingual status was changed from English speaking as the designation to mother tongue. And as you know, the mother tongue being English going forward is going to go lower and lower and lower as more people come from out of if you want, out of the province into the province of Quebec. Côte Saint-Luc is one of those cases where they're in jeopardy of losing their bilingual status with the new definition because while I think about 80% of their population speaks English, you have 46% are mother tongue English. So please, let's not call Quebec a unilingual province. It is unilingual in parts of Quebec, but the island of Montreal and the region of Montreal is bilingual, and that is a strength. Another aspect I'd like to add, and then I'll pass on, is Mr. Dwayne asked about the Francophones going to English schools. I have two sons who were competitive in sports and also went to French schools in order for them to be bilingual, and I'm very pleased that they were so. Their friends that they met, and through both the sports and the education system, asked when they were outside of, if you want, the institution, and even when they were on sports teams, the parents of the boys that played with my son asked politely if all the practices could be done in English, because unfortunately there was not a way for their boys to master the English language to the way that the boys that they were playing with, who could speak both French and English to them, and they wanted to do the same. So that is something that I hope in future that when I look at Bill 96 and read through it and get very concerned for the future of my boys who are bilingual and university educated, and the world is open to them, and am concerned that maybe I may lose them to the world, I'm equally and maybe more concerned about the Francophone children out there who are forced to stay in Quebec because they cannot get out. They do not have the tools, and they will lose out if they try to go outside of Quebec to anywhere else in Canada and in the world. And I love it. My son has competed for jobs in Switzerland because he's bilingual enough. And, you know, they can live anywhere in Canada. And one of them has decided to leave because the person he happened to fall in love with in an Ontario University, an engineering school, who's also an engineer, lives in Vancouver. And her opportunities in Quebec were very, very limited because of that. And therefore, my bilingual son left with his unilingual if you want, a Vancouver girlfriend and went to live in Vancouver. So that is, I would say, a major loss for Quebec. It's a major brain drain where we're losing talented bilingual kids to other places where they could be welcomed and because they want to be here. Why would they all make efforts to be bilingual? It's not to leave Quebec. Quebec is their home. I hoped one day they would, all my children would stay in Quebec, but from what I'm seeing and from the evolution that my family has done since 1958, since we've arrived, to become more and more French, if you want, in our way, and working in French and embracing the French language. And I understand the importance to protect it in a sea of North America, which is English, but there's ways of doing it, and you have to bring us along and not make it so that you're sending our children away because they could have been an asset to this province. So there's a few things there that I hope you reflect on and you bring back. Bill 96 is a disservice to the island of Montreal, to the bilingual population you have, and also a disservice to your Francophone population because you will keep them here and limited to only here, and you're curtailing their potential, and that is very sad to see. That is it for me. I can't hear you, Nadia.
I was saying thank you, Marie.
Oh,
okay, I was on mute. So I have two more questions before I go to them. I don't know if Mr. Skeete, you have any comment before we move to further questions. If you have any comments.
No, this is your time. It is what you make of it.
Okay, if you, I have two questions, and I'm not sure who are. I see two hands. Oh, Mr. Leduc, please.
I thank you for taking my question. And Maria would say that the island of Montreal is multilingual, not just bilingual. So we have quite a diverse population here. So, Mr. Skeete, thanks for joining us. So I'm a private contractor and I have a business that's incorporated in Canada, but I operate out of Quebec. So I pay deductions at source and sales tax to Quebec, and it's then distributed accordingly to Canada. And I do this online. So I do this online through a Revenue Quebec website, which is bilingual. And if I have a problem, I can call a government of Quebec employee and speak to them in English. So I'm reading an interpretation from, I just Googled it, and I'm reading an interpretation that says, you will need French-speaking staff or counsel when interacting with or acting as service provider for the government or its agencies. Does this bill mean that I will eventually lose a bilingual website and the ability to speak to a government of Quebec employee in English?
That's actually a very good question. Mr. Leduc, basically, English-speaking Quebecers as individuals have the right to exchange or to speak with government agencies in the language of their status in English or in French. In the case of English-speaking Quebecers, you'd be allowed to speak with a government agent about your personal file in English. Les sociétés ou les personnes morales don't have that right. That is not new. That's actually something that's always existed in Bill 101, but we are moving towards exemplarity of the state, and that is something that may change for you. But just to be clear, that's when you're dealing with Revenue Quebec or whatnot, when you want to interchange with them, but that has nothing to do with you serving your clients in English or you having an English website. That's not something that the government gets involved in.
That was not my question. I deal with Revenue Quebec. Their website today is bilingual. And if I have a problem, then I need to ask a government of Quebec employees, Revenue Quebec, a question, then I can speak to them in English. So the question again is, are we going to lose that bilingual website, Revenue Quebec? And will I lose the ability to speak to that person in English?
As it is now, the Bill 96 has not passed. As it is now, les personnes morales do not have the right to speak in English. The business of the state is supposed to be done in French. Historically, they haven't done so. That's what I'm saying. So
I'm going to ask the question again. So if you pass Bill 96,
what I'm saying is it has nothing to do with Bill 96. Right now, they shouldn't be doing it, and they have been doing it. So it has nothing to do with Bill 96. Right now, the government should be dealing with les personnes morales, i.e. businesses or nonprofits. They should be dealing with them exclusively in French. They haven't been, is what I'm saying. So right now, that's the law.
Except that Bill 96 makes it 10 times harder. You can't even you have to have permission to speak, to use English. When you do, if you get given that permission, you have to have a certified copy of the French of the text, including in the courts now. When you go to court and you want to use English, you will only be allowed to do so when you have a certified copy in French, paid for at your own expense.
That is complete balderdash. That makes no. That is not even remotely true.
Mr. Skeete, you haven't read Bill 96. It's not balderdash. I'll challenge you to tell me it's balderdash. That today, if I go to court.
Mr. Lincoln, I told you, Section 133 gives you the right to speak in English during court cases. You're a lawyer.
You better read.
You're a lawyer.
Well, I tell you, if you give me 5 minutes, I'll quote you the stuff. Okay? And don't tell me it's balderdash. It's not so. When you go, I will quote the section of 96 and I will read it to you. Okay? I'll find it.
In between, I think we have another question left. I'm not sure where. Oh, Madame Perignon, you have a question, Mrs. Perignon? You're on mute. I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. Sorry, it's not quite a question, but it's just a comment. I just want to voice out the minority, like the Filipinos. I'm representing the Filipinos. I'm the president of the Kahirap Hiligaynon Association of Quebec, and I'm secretary of Filipino Heritage Society of Montreal and Philippine Benevolent and Scholarship Society. Now, I'm just going to refer to the Filipino Heritage Society of Montreal. Most of our members and administrators are elders. They're more seniors. And so when Bill 96 is going to be passed, these elder people, they either work like 2 or 3 jobs, at the same time, just to make ends meet and send money to their families in the Philippines. And then if they're required to learn French, they're too tired, and plus they're too old to learn, and they don't have the time to learn this French, because I was told that people are supposed to learn French. So now, I have an example. These elder people, they receive, how do you call this, mail in French. And so sometimes, they come to me, and because I'm bilingual or trilingual, I should say. So I help them. But they said when they go to those offices, there's no way, the people in the counter or whatever, they refuse to talk to them in French. And so they kind of just are lost. I had an experience too. Last year, I went to the REQ to renew the fee, for our associations. And this lady in the counter refused to speak French. Luckily, I speak French, but the other lady who was with me didn't understand. I had to translate to her. So now when that Bill 96 is gonna be adopted, it will be worse. So what are we gonna do? So that's what my concern is about. Okay. And as well, the people, there's a lot, Canada wants to have immigrants to come here. There's a lot of Filipinos who want to come here, but then they're prevented to come. Why? First of all, because of this French thing, you know, but Canada needs all this, employment, or how do you call this, the immigrants to help, you know, in our economy. But, you know, what do? They go to Ontario or to BC or Manitoba or Saskatchewan because, you know, they're trying to avoid this French. And it's not because they don't want to learn, but they're here to work. And they don't have time, and they're just making ends meet, and they're helping their families in the Philippines. So that's what my concern is all about.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you.
Mr. Skeete, do you have any comment on her question or her concern?
So that was already something that we thought of when we presented Bill 96. All persons who were currently receiving their documents in English at the time that Bill 96 was presented to the National Assembly, be they persons who are allowed to receive documentations in English or not, will continue to receive documents in English. As of now, future immigrants will be expected to transition to French after 6 months, but anybody who hadn't before will be able to continue having English documents.
I have a question for the 6 months. For some of the countries, like Asian languages, do you think 6 months is a reasonable expectation?
No, for me, I've talked to people, 6 months is not enough because at the same time they're working. And so they work during the day and they can, maybe, I don't know if that could be given in the evening classes, but they're too tired. How could, you know, they absorb what they're learning? Plus, they don't have anybody to practice it with. So it's only in the classes where they can practice or learn. But 6 months, I don't think that's enough. Yeah, so I don't know.
I think I would. Yeah, so the question to you, Mr. Skeete, do you feel that 6 months is a reasonable time to learn French, especially when you come from a non-Latin language?
So one of the things that Bill 96 does is it creates an entity known as Francisation Québec. Francisation Québec is going to be the entity that's going to be the single service where people go to learn French in Quebec. Francisation Quebec will deploy a lot of resources and force employers to teach their employees French during work hours, as well as making sure that people can learn French outside of their hours. There will be historical investments made so that people can learn French for free, on company time, or on their own time. So we're going to deploy a lot of resources to make sure that we help people transition towards the common language.
And with that, do you think that 6 months would be enough?
I think there's currently discussions going on with the bill. Other people have said during the consultations that they find that 6 months is a little short. That's one of the things that could probably be looked at when we're doing our consultations with the opposition parties. So right now it's 6 months, but I think other people have said that they find it a little short. Some people said they didn't want any. I remind you that this is what the Association of Baie-d'Urfé thinks, but a lot of my citizens in Sainte-Rose don't agree with anything that's being said here. But so there's always two sides to a coin. But that being said, you should know that other people have evoked that 6 months might be a little short.
I think I have. Okay, there is Mr. Alain Brunet. I have a question from Alain Brunet, but you're on mute, Alain.
Juste noter, Madame Bissada, qu'il nous reste seulement 5 minutes. Je m'excuse de mon intervention.
Allô? Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Oui.
Oui, on vous entend.
Je vous entends.
Monsieur Skeete, il nous reste 5 minutes seulement.
Oui, ben, je veux surtout remercier Monsieur Skeete. Vous m'avez informé sur beaucoup de détails sur la loi 96 qui me rassure beaucoup. Moi-même, en tant que francophone qui a eu la chance d'apprendre de l'anglais parce que justement, j'ai surtout vécu à Montréal et j'ai été beaucoup exposé à l'anglais. Alors, je voulais dire que c'est important évidemment de protéger le français par le fait que les entités anglophones ou des régions anglophones en Amérique, que ce soit en Amérique du Nord ou en Amérique du Sud, Il y en a plusieurs. Alors, le Québec pourrait être bon 30e après l'Oklahoma ou le Nevada ou je ne sais pas quoi en tant qu'anglophone. Et en tant que francophone, on est les premiers en Amérique du Nord, Amérique du Sud, comme entité francophone. Et puis, comme je l'ai dit aux dernières rencontres, il y a une centaine de pays dans le monde où la langue française est première. Et puis, ces gens-là, s'ils veulent venir en Amérique, bien, c'est le Québec qui est le principal endroit. Alors, c'est vrai que c'est dommage que si on parle espagnol ou si on parle le russe ou autre chose, on allait au Québec, on a de la difficulté avec le français. Mais il faut savoir que c'est important de le protéger. Et puis, j'apprécie ce que vous faites tout en étant respectueux des privilèges que les anglophones ont au Québec. Merci, M. Skeete, c'était excellent.
Merci, Alain. OK, il reste une question, si je peux passer.
En fait, avant la prochaine question, je devrais faire un commentaire sur l'intervention de M. Brunet. Merci. Je pense qu'on se doit au Québec, après 400 ans d'histoire unique en Amérique du Nord, de faire notre part pour s'assurer que dans les 400 prochaines années, on parle encore français sur ce continent. Moi, ce qui m'inspire, en fait, qu'est-ce qui me désinspire, c'est de voir ce qui est arrivé en Louisiane. Ça serait tellement tragique de voir au Québec ce qui est arrivé à la Louisiane. Je pense qu'on doit ça à la mémoire collective.
Oui. Merci, M. Skeete. Merci, Alain. Est-ce qu'on a encore le temps pour une question?
Oui, une dernière, c'est beau.
Une dernière. Madame Huguette Thomas?
Thomasin.
Sorry, je ne vois pas. Oui, Madame Thomasin.
Oui,
excusez-moi.
De rien, madame. Bonsoir, M. Skeete, et merci infiniment de votre présence ici ce soir. Je suis passablement beaucoup, pour ne pas dire énormément d'accord avec M. Brunet. Et pour ce qui concerne l'enseignement de l'anglais aux francophones, vous avez absolument raison. Dans mon autre vie, j'étais directrice d'une école. D'un côté, c'était le côté anglophone. De l'autre côté, le côté francophone. Tout le monde entrait par la même porte. Il n'y avait pas aucune séparation entre les deux langues. Alors, je peux vous dire que le matin, quand je passais dans le corridor du côté anglophone et que j'entendais, du côté francophone, anglophone, c'est ça, et que j'entendais les petits-enfants de première année chanter déjà en français, alors que moi, de mon côté francophone, il me fallait attendre la 4e année avant que mes élèves puissent commencer à baragouiner l'anglais, qu'ils ont baragouiné toute leur vie parce que, comme vous l'avez très bien dit, très souvent, très mal enseigné. Alors, évidemment qu'on leur enlève des chances dans la vie. Parce qu'avec le monde de communication dans lequel nous vivons à l'heure actuelle, il est important de connaître un minimum de 2 langues, d'autant plus que la plupart dans mon école, la plupart des nouveaux arrivés venaient à l'école française, parlaient anglais à la maison et le samedi matin venaient à l'école pour leur langue maternelle, leur langue d'origine. Alors, ils étaient trilingues en partant, pendant que mes petits élèves ne possédaient qu'une langue, qui très souvent ne la parlaient pas très bien, l'écrivaient mal, et c'était comme ça. Alors, quel était leur avenir? Ils n'avaient pas beaucoup d'avenir, n'est-ce pas? Alors, je suis d'accord et j'ai été rassurée, M. Skeete, quand vous avez dit qu'au niveau du cégep anglophone, les francophones pourraient continuer d'y avoir accès. Parce que c'est important. Dans un monde idéal, tout le monde devrait être bilingue. Et ça n'enlève rien à ce qu'au Québec, la langue principale soit la langue française. Nous sommes une province. Il ne faut pas oublier que le Canada a été fondé par des francophones, des Français de France. Nous sommes un des 2 peuples fondateurs. Les Français en premier, les Anglais en deuxième, quand ils ont gagné la bataille des plaines d'Abraham. Alors, il ne faut pas oublier cela. Il faut se rappeler l'histoire. Alors, c'est très important, mais pour moi, je trouve très important que les jeunes, pour avoir le plus de chances possible, puissent être capables de, disons, aller dans les cégeps anglophones et poursuivre à McGill. Pour ma part, j'ai 2 filles moi, qui ont étudié à McGill, les 2. J'ai des petits-enfants qui ne sont uniquement qu'anglophones et une qui est parfaitement bilingue. Alors, c'est absolument important qu'au Québec, notre langue première soit le français. Et ce que j'ai trouvé dans mes expériences un peu personnelles, je trouve que la communauté anglophone au Québec vit dans son monde, n'écoute jamais de programmes francophones, n'est pas au courant de rien de ce qui se passe du côté francophone. Alors que nous, les francophones, très souvent, nous allons écouter des émissions anglophones. Par exemple, Marketplace. Moi, j'écoute Marketplace régulièrement et un paquet d'autres émissions, ce que les anglophones, malheureusement, ne font pas. J'ai déjà conversé assez souvent avec des personnes anglophones et on aurait dit que c'était un autre monde. C'est comme si nous étions au Québec 2 solitudes. Les francophones d'un côté, les anglophones de l'autre. Même si on s'apprécie, tout ça, ça n'a rien à voir. Mais ce serait important qu'on puisse davantage échanger. Échanger entre nous, on se connaîtrait encore mieux. Et puis l'idéal, comme je vous disais, que tout le monde soit bilingue au niveau supérieur. Parce que la langue française, on le sait, elle est difficile à apprendre. Elle est difficile à écrire parce qu'il y a beaucoup de règles et tout ça, beaucoup d'exceptions. Ça, je comprends ça, je concède ça. Mais au moins, si on pouvait, tout le monde être capable de former une nation, si on peut dire. Que notre province soit une.
Merci, Madame Thomasin.
Alors, merci, M. Skeete.
Merci, Madame Thomasin, pour votre intervention. Et puis,
merci.
Monsieur Skeete, je ne sais pas si ce serait abusé de votre temps de vous demander la dernière question qui était où on termine tout de suite. C'est comme vous voulez.
En fait, ce que je voulais faire surtout, c'est de réagir avec le commentaire de Mme Thomasin sur les 2 solitudes. Puis je pense que c'est une belle façon de clore la soirée, là, parce que pour moi, c'est profondément important. Les 2 solitudes font en sorte qu'on regarde les choses sans considérer le prisme de l'autre. We look at this world and we see it through the prism of our eyes and our realities and our experience. But what's missing on both sides is the empathy of understanding of the other. English-speaking Quebecers see themselves as minorities in Quebec, and they feel surrounded by that majority that, as I think Maria said, is 90% Francophone everywhere else other than Montreal. And it's like, well, we're a small community and we need to be together. Francophones look at that prism and see the North American context and say, my gosh, we're only 8 million in the sea of 360 million English speakers. I think when we take the time to understand the other, we make a lot of progress. My hope for tonight is understanding. As I said, I have no illusions about having moved the needle on any one of your opinions. I don't believe that was the purpose. The purpose today was about giving you access to your government. The purpose today was to give you a voice inside your government so that you can express yourself. And I think it's important. It's the least I can do as an elected official is to be there for you and hear your concerns. So on that note, I'm due to put my children to bed. It's 8:30. It's already past their bedtimes. But I thank the association for the invitation. I think it's useful that we keep talking with one another, that we keep building these bridges, even though we don't agree. And I hope that we can do this again on a regular basis, and maybe not in the context of 96. This was a lot of worry, a lot of angst. Like maybe we can have a discussion about other things, about what we want for Quebec in the future and what we want to do together in terms of building those bridges. So I really hope that we could do this again another time.
We thank you very much. We thank you very much, Mr. Skeete. And I think you're right. We were able to get from your perspective. And I hope, as you said, there are still consultation and there could be some changes. And we are, I maybe speak for myself, it was refreshing to see your empathy to our concerns and you relate to them. Whether we agree or not, I think that's beside the point. But we can agree to disagree, but we can talk together, and this is very important. That's the main thing. So we really appreciate your being here, and we take your word for your willingness to come again. Thank you very much. And thank you all of you for being here and for an interesting session.
Thank you very much.
Merci tout le monde. Merci pour votre contribution et votre présence. Merci.
Mrs. Bissada, if I may, before Mr. Skeete leaves, he accused me of talking balderdash, and he accused me of not knowing what I was talking about. Well, I would like to kind of point out to him that what I said is exactly right. He better read section 5.9 of the law that says a certified French translation shall be attached to any pleading drawn up in English that emanates from a legal person. The legal person shall bear the translation costs, and